आओ जी मेरे देश मेरे गांव मेरी धूप मेरी छाँव से मिलाऊं। आओ जी मेरे देश मेरे गांव मेरी धूप मेरी छाँव से मिलाऊं। आओ जी मेरे देश मेरे गांव मेरी धूप मेरी छाँव से मिलाऊं। आओ जी मेरे देश मेरे गांव मेरी धूप मेरी छाँव से मिलाऊं। भूल जाए जो रास्ता थोड़ा वापस आना।
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends from our literary community, a very warm and delightful evening to each one of you. Director Galton Doji and I extend a very heart welcome on behalf of Bhutan Echoes on the launch of the Right Circle series in Bhutan, a cherished literary initiative by the Prabha and Khaitan Foundation in collaboration with CIE, Bhutan Echoes, our venue partner TWC Yarge Hotel, and media partners BBS in Quinsel and La Sola Studios. This event is sponsored by Sheer Cement as part of the CSR initiative. For those joining us for the first time, Bhutan Echoes is a literature and arts initiative dedicated to the cultivation, promotion, and celebration of literature, culture, and arts in Bhutan, under the royal patronage of Her Majesty the Queen Mother, Gyaltsum Aji Doji Wangmo Wangchuk. Please allow me to provide a brief introduction to the Prabha Khaitan Foundation. It is a non-profit trust fund based in Calcutta, founded by the eminent Indian literator, entrepreneur, philanthropist, social activist, and feminist, late Dr. Prabha Khaitan in the 1980s. The foundation is deeply dedicated to the promotion of art, culture, education, literature, gender equality, and women's empowerment. Their impactful efforts have touched over 50 cities across India and beyond, organizing numerous culture and literature events. Their literary initiative, the Right Circle series, is an exclusive event that brings together renowned authors and their readers in an engaging setting. Starting its journey in Jaipur, the series has now spread to various cities in India and even overseas, including Oxford, New York, and Oslo. A special thank you to Meeta Kapoor, who could not join us here today, and Urvi for the instrumental roles in bringing this prestigious event to Bhutan. We are truly delighted and honored to welcome our guest speaker, Nilanjana Roy, an accomplished novelist, columnist with the Financial Times, and editor. Her notable works include the award-winning The Wilding series. Black River, her first work of neurofiction, was recognized as one of the best crime novels of 2023 by The Guardian. Nilanjana is here to discuss this brilliant book, and she will be in conversation with Sonam Pem, a poet, academic, and feminist who's deeply passionate about advocacy for gender equality, sexual and reproductive health and rights. Today, they will unpack the making of Black River and delve into the realms of reading and writing. The program will conclude with the Q&A session, during which the audience is encouraged to ask questions. Once again, a very warm welcome to each one of you, and please enjoy this evening of literature. May I now kindly request Ms. Nilanjana and Ms. Sonam to join us on stage and to commence the session.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. And I just wanted to thank Bhutan Echoes, the Prabha Khaitan Foundation, Dusiti, and of course the people at the back who've done everything. It's such a pleasure to be here and to meet old friends and to make new ones. And Sonam, thank you so much for giving your time to this.
Thank you so much, Nilanjana, and I'm as honored to be here. And welcome to all of the guests. Thank you so much for making time. And we hope that it's a fun session. We hope that you have fun. And so can we start? Are you ready? Okay. So Nilanjana, it's great to have you here. So to kick off the session on a very light note, if you could have any character from your book, Black River, if you could invite them on a walk, who would it be and what would you most likely talk about?
I love that question. One of my characters is a maverick man who loves rivers and who's a little detached from reality. He's called Khalid. He's a gentle soul who talks to birds and ants. And I'd love to invite him to walk along Thimphu, the outskirts, the hills, up all the way up to Buddha Point. And I'm sure he'd have a lot to tell me about the spirits of the earth, because in Black River, which in part is about crime, but in part is also about landscapes and how they change us, even in a city like Delhi. He's a man whose soul sings to the river and it sings back to him, and I think he would have loved being here.
I think as people whose heart belongs to Thimphu, that's really nice to hear. And my second question is, your books, The Wildings and The 100 Names of Darkness, yes, it delves into the fantasy world of animals. So what was the inspiration behind that, and was it a challenge bringing animals to life?
I have to admit, I never meant to be a writer. I had a life as an editor and as a reporter. And I used to love reading books, but just quietly scribble my stories and my poems to myself. And the reason I wrote about cats was it's all the fault of the cats themselves. I had a very shy little cat called Mara. She went peacefully some years ago. And she was a timid cat, an inside cat. And then I noticed that she was making friends with the outside cats. So after a while, I made friends with the outside cats as well. And then I started to walk around Jangpura and Nizamuddin, which are these two localities in Delhi, very old. And I suddenly realized that, we see the world from up here. But the moment that you go down to this level or high up in the trees, there's a completely different universe. And so I started to write about it, and as happens with cats, they added themselves to the book. There was a little mouse called Jethro Tull who stepped into the narrative, and then one of the tigers in the zoo, his name was Ozymandias, King of Kings, but he was actually very sweet and not as dignified as he sounded. And then there were Teddy's monkeys, and then after a while I had 2 books. So that's how it happened.
All right. My next question is, you have been involved in a lot of collaborative projects, especially Our Freedom, right? So when it comes to working with fiction and non-fiction, what do you think are your biggest challenges? Do you enjoy working with fiction or with non-fiction?
I love that question because I think it speaks to, the split souls that many writers or many artists have. I think a lot of us who are creative, whether we're writers or architects or designers or something, we often have a mind that almost goes in 2 channels, 2 different directions. And so what I love about fiction is basically it's very intimate, it's very personal. It taps into the deepest part of my imagination, really, And fiction is very private. You're sitting there in a room, and your characters and the world that's, thrumming so loudly in your head it almost drowns out the rest of your family and everything else that's going on. Fiction is an early morning. It's a quiet, or a late at night. That's when the writing happens. But I've also loved collaborations because writing actually is far more of, that image of the writer as this lonely person in their attics. It's only partly true. We're also part of a much wider community. Our Freedoms, the book that you mentioned, happened as our democracy was changing, and as we realized later, it wasn't just with India. In different parts of the world, the appeal of autocracy is coming back. There's a movement towards aggressive nationalism and all of that. And as writers, we're not that good at organizing or protests or politics per se. But what we can do is lift up our voices together and say, how do you feel about this? What does the word freedom mean to you? And so I asked something like 30 writers across India, including Perumal Murugan and a lot of people I respect, really. And I think it was striking, to see that all of us somewhere in our heads had been holding these separate visions of what a truly free, a life, a country, a world might be like. And I believe in this thing that Gloria Steinem said. She said, you have to imagine a better future. It just doesn't happen on its own. And it starts with the imagination. You can't just lament. You have to try to create something more beautiful, more solid. And I think that happens more with the community. That's what I like about most of the nonfiction I do. I'm sorry, that went really long, and you have to shut me up whenever.
All right. Actually, I forgot what my question was. Sorry, I was like listening to what you were saying, and picking up on where you left off. You're talking about how it was mainly because politics was changing for India at that time, and that's why you guys felt the need to add a public commentary and public opinion on those kind of ideas. And I think it's a very crucial time for Bhutan as well, because we are also going through a time where our politics is changing. It is making us more aware as people. So I think it resonates with a lot of Bhutanese people, especially right now, especially for people in the room. And deviating towards a more controversial topic, the book, Black River, it talks about the death of a really loved girl who is very liked in her community. And I wanted to ask you, was that inspired by all of the crime that India constantly is reading about, is constantly hearing about?
I think what you're saying, Sonam, if I get you right, is that writing also comes out of a certain kind of urgency, or it moves from the reality that we inhabit. I'd spent a few years by then with the New York Times and a few other places as a gender reporter. And I think what I was seeing then was the rise of an almost aggressive pushback at women who were out in the open. And by the time I started to write Black River, I carried a very sorrowful heart. It wasn't inspired by any one story in particular, but I think, by the time the landscape beyond Delhi and in Uttar Pradesh, for me, was crisscrossed with lines of grief. It was a map of grief, it was a map of loss, and most of all, it was a deep map of absences. The absences of women or young girls who should have been there, who should have had their entire lives ahead of them. But around that grief, I also saw something else, which is, it's never black and white. It's never, oh, this is the place where the terrible violent crimes happen. Interlaced with that, there's also the surprising thing of a father, who's brought up his child as a single parent and who steps away from a kind of conservative masculinity in order to grieve to find out what the right way of grieving is. You might have a policeman, who's bludgeoned by the system into being corrupt or callous or whatever, but who for whatever reasons decides that justice matters to him. It's unexpected. That side of it also came out of what I saw on the ground. After a while, for every heart-rending story, for every absolutely unspeakable, unbearable murder or loss or incident of trafficking that I saw, I marveled. I could not lose hope, ever. Because what happened was that you step out there and you also see the courage and the determination, the resilience of people. It's a very hard one, resilience. It's not just, put your hand up one day and sign a petition. It goes much deeper than that. Of people who say that no matter what, we will change. And that also comes out of India. And with Bhutan, wherever you are, with politics, it all starts and ends with discussions. It all starts and ends with conversations. The more open you can be, the more free you can be about your doubts or fears or hopes and dreams, the more you'll get somewhere.
All right, thank you so much. You said at some point that you were a journalist, gender journalist with a newspaper. My next question is, as a former journalist and as a creative writer now, how do you find a balance between the objective nature that journalism demands and the creative freedom that writing fiction needs of you?
Again, that's a really good question, because I haven't found the balance. That's the truth. I think I'm just starting out as a writer. I published my first book, Really Late, which, by the way, is just any of you who are in your 40s or 50s and have a book secretly hidden away. Don't even think about it. The oldest writer I know, somebody who came to writing recently, is 82, and she's very happy with what she's doing. anyway, to stop digressing and get back to that, I only published my first books when I was about 37, and then it took me another decade, I was doing a lot of other things, anthologies and everything, and that's when Black River came about. I think the non-fiction and the fictional worlds are not porous and separate. The imagination is a real thing. I believe it's like a muscle. The more you exercise it, I'm always surprised when people ask me, where do you get your ideas from? Because, my private thing is, I wish the ideas would shut up sometimes and just let me be. Once you start dreaming them up, there's so many of them. But fiction also is embedded in reality. Even the world's wildest fantasy, even Harry Potter, Hogwarts had a shape to it. What people eat and drink out there. And part of your job, where journalism makes it easy, is you've hopefully developed the habit of actually listening to people, and you can mimic reality. You can respect your characters by giving them a reality that is as deep as the real world. To me, the fictional world has a certain kind of depth, and it is to be respected.
So I think I have to ask you, do you think art imitates life, or do you think life imitates art more?
Does art imitate life or life imitate art? Okay, I don't want to bore you with this, but you go back to the start of story, and story is old, man. Story is fable, fantasy, all of that. It seems like almost the first thing that we did, and we didn't need to do this years back when we didn't have, museums, or we didn't have the tools of craft per se. It's extraordinary to me that in the middle of the busy life of early humanity, the first thing they did was pick up a blackened stick and draw carvings or animals on a cave, Or the first thing that they did was to sit around and respect stories so much that they actually carved it into stone when they could. And before that, you have centuries literally of oral storytelling. Again, that's something that seems to be so deeply embedded into the texture of Bhutan itself. I don't know how many of your oral tales have been around for how many centuries, but the land itself, hums with stories. And so there you have it. I don't think either of them imitate each other. I think in some way that we don't completely understand, we need art, It doesn't matter what your job is. It could be in the corporate world, or it could be in the bureaucratic world. But somewhere I really think that something in us would wither and die away without art. That's where we put the life.
And I completely agree, because while the world was, especially while we were, during the pandemic, I think everybody turned to art to get through the hard times. And I think that's why I personally think people who create art deserve a lot more respect than they get from society and from people around them. And my next question is, while you create art, are there any unusual or quirky habits or rituals that you have developed over time?
That is telling. Oh my God, if I go back to my desk tomorrow and I think I'm now creating art, I will have writer's block for a century. But if it was anything that important, I wouldn't be able to do it. But I do start the day, my day is noisy, in part because there's 4 cats and multitudes of friends and family, and Delhi, by and large, is a large-hearted and a very talkative city, But the first 15 minutes of the day, I like starting that in as much quiet as possible with a rambunctious 2-year-old kitten called Magnus Musafir Mantu leaping over your papers. And I usually, it's a cup of Darjeeling tea, and I know this sounds a little silly, but it isn't to me. I light a small stick of incense, and I just send forth a kind of quiet prayer, saying that whatever I do today, it's not about let it be good or great or anything of the sort. It's just let it be true. And hopefully, whatever I make today, may it be in harmony with what you want, not with what I want. And then I start.
Thank you so much. So picking up on where you left off, talking about the writer's block. So writer's block is something that a lot of creative people struggle with. So when you have your writer's block, when you have a creative block, How do you deal with it, and how do you move past creative blocks?
Very early on, when I was a young reporter, I had a chance to meet one of the great Indian painters called M.F. Hussain. And somebody else in his studio out there said, "Mr. Hussain, what do you do when you're blocked?" And he said, being blocked, that's for people who just don't understand art and they aren't artists, which was a very harsh thing to say. But then he said, if you really want to create, it's there, it's at your fingertips. And if you're taking it so seriously, that you've frozen with fear because of the thought, what is a block about? It's either you're out of ideas, in which case, get up, go take a walk, look around, pay attention to the world. Mary Oliver has that, beautiful instruction to us. Just pay attention to life. Mary Oliver is one of my favorite poets. Just pay attention. The world is filled with inspiration. Everywhere, anywhere you live. I can guarantee you, even if you live in a 2-foot room, prisoners to it, you can find what you care about, what you know, what you deeply, deeply want to bring into creation. It's all there. And the second thing is, stop being so serious. Whenever somebody comes to me and says that, I'm blocked, I realize that often they're frozen by the kind of muscle stiffness almost, They're so afraid of being read, or they're so afraid that what they write will not be perfect, or whatever. And what was it that we did when we were kids and making up stories or running around climbing trees or whatever, or playing hide and seek? We just played, we played instinctively and effortlessly. And sometimes you just need to get back to being playful. And I refuse to believe in writer's block, I just refuse to give it. I'm serious about this. I believe that if I believe in it, I will stop writing. If I give something that kind of power. What happens sometimes is that you go through seasons of, you go through fallow seasons. And very much like the land, it's up to you to know when you're tired, when something else is on your mind. This happens a lot to women particularly, but to anyone who creates and is busy. And then just do what you do with the earth, which is, turn over the soil, let it breathe, let it rest, be gentle with yourself, and come back in some other form.
Okay. You said that a lot of people do not publish with the fear of being read, with the fear of being known. And I just wanted to clarify that I don't publish because I'm worried that I'm too young to get a Pulitzer, and I feel like at this point, if I get a Pulitzer so young, then God would have competition. So, just kidding. I'm not narcissistic. Okay. All right. The next question is: I've noticed that a lot of your work, it's deeply rooted to the Indian culture, of course, but I see that it manifests itself into your respect for the Indian culture, and I've noticed that, like, even in Black River, there are very vivid imagery that is like very Indian. Like the story starts with Munya, among people, where she's eating something called biscuit. Not. I looked up what it was. It was supposed to be an ice cream of some sort. So yeah. So my question is, a lot of these imageries, they have a lot of Indian culture, and I wanted to ask you, is Indian culture one of your muses? Do you get your work manifests in actually you get the point. I'm at a loss for words at this point.
No, but I see what you're saying, and this is one of those old debates again in writing. Do you write from home? Do you write from away? When we were kids in an English medium convent school, we used to sit there stiffly trying to write stories about children called Anne and Shirley and Charles, because that was what we had read in English books. And one of my teachers said, "Why are you doing this?" I said, "Because that's the names in the English books, that's what we read." And she said, "Don't you read Bengali children's stories?" I said, "Yeah." So she said, "You can use those names in English." It was like a light bulb going off in my head, We don't just have to be passively sitting there reading stories. We can actually, later, of course, I discovered a world of Indian writers and filmmakers and creators. But I would never compare myself in any other terms to Satyajit Ray. I have to make this amply clear. But there's one thing I learned from him. I still love his films. As a teenager, I used to watch all of them, Pothir Panchali, Upu Shonchar. And he was absolutely unself-conscious about doing stories immersed in the place that he knew best or that he was most curious about. Those two things go in tandem. I'm in my 50s and I'm still figuring out who I am as a writer. But instinctively, I'm drawn back to Delhi time and time again. And if my work has Indian references, I think that's because that's the texture, the breadth, the fabric of the place that I grew up in. I think if I tried to write a story about New York, which is a place that I visited but not lived in, I would fall flat on my face. I wouldn't know it the way that a New Yorker does. But what I like about this time, and it wasn't true even as far back as the 1970s, when writers like V.S. Naipaul were writing, the UK reviewers dismissed his books as a little savory from the colonies. And when the great Toni Morrison brought out her first books, she had reviewers in the New York Times of that day saying, this is all very well, but she should really put some white people into her books, because otherwise she'd lose her audience. And you see how much things change. You see that the world has become wider. It accepts writers like me or Nigerian writers. You could be from anywhere and write for anywhere. The rootedness part of it, this is just a personal thing. I think some of us are inextricably tied to the places that we were born in or grew up in. With Delhi, with Black River, I walked a lot of that book. It was walking through a river that ran through the middle of our city, and that most of us turn our backs on, the Yamuna. It's polluted, it's dirty, it's this, that, and the other. But it is also astonishing. It is a vast Himalayan river. It has a kind of silver grey power to it. It carries myths with it, along with the pollution. And as I walked in through its bends and things, I discovered that this is where the migrants come. This is where the people who are new to Delhi and can't find shelter anywhere else, they find shelter in the curves and bends of the Yamuna. And I wasn't looking for a story, but it found me. I think, your stories find you better when they know where you're most at home. And that doesn't have to mean a homeland. There are people here, younger writers, whose home might be skateboarding, it might be the internet, it might be a club life that they know best and that they really, really want to write about. One of the best literary books of last year, and I'm forgetting the title, but it was written by this writer who writes about gaming, So the big question that you have to answer, I don't want to get too ponderous about writing or art or too prescriptive, but I think if you're creative, you have to know your home ground, you have to know your turf, your terrain, you have to know what matters most to you. And that's where it comes from.
No worries. All right, thank you so much. That does resonate a lot with everybody in the room, especially the part where you said you could find home in a club. The other thing that I wanted to talk to you about is how you said, the thing is, we were talking about representation. I want to talk about that, and about how all these authors, they diverted from the norm. They wrote about something that resonated with them, and I think that is something that makes a lot of sense, because while I was growing up, I would mostly read Sidney Sheldon and Agatha Christie, but then I discovered Ajit Kunzang's work when I was in 6th grade, and I read Dawa, The Stray Dog of Bhutan, and I think it really, no matter what anyone says, it really makes a lot of difference when you see people like yourself in books, see people whose values align with you in movies, books, wherever. So yes, I think that does help a lot in finding your identity in the world as you grow up as well. And my next question is, if you could collaborate with your work with anyone living or deceased at any point in time, who would it be, and what do you think you would most likely collaborate on?
That's a very revealing, the answers to this question are going to be horribly revealing. But there's an incredible Kashmiri mystic saint called Lal Deed. And I mean, I love her poems. They're about not just finding God, but they're about wrestling with God. And her life on the road was hard and often painful, often dangerous. But my God, she could walk. And the other person I'd want to take a long, long walk through any part of the world with, James Baldwin. You know, the man, whether he was in Europe or whether he was in America, he saw. He knew how to see. He could walk through a neighborhood and he could walk through a city and that he didn't even know, and he could feel its pulse beating. And he saw through all the great myths as well. So my company would always be walking company. Jimmy Baldwin for sure. And Nilanjana Roy. I hear she's a great walker.
I actually sadly, I haven't heard or read the other people you mentioned, but I am familiar with James Baldwin's work, and I feel like his work has been overshadowed with the other more vocal figures who were, present at that time. And I think it is one of his quotes that said that you could think that the worst thing in the world is happening to you, but then there's always someone else who has a bigger, who is going through something even bad or something even worse. But yes, like you said, I think James Baldwin is someone, and I would like to take notes later about the other two people that you mentioned and read up on their work as well. Yeah. And my other question is, when it comes to literature and your work, do you have any literary pet peeves where there's a common trope or common genre that you try to stay away from or you try not to delve too much into?
It's not a pet peeve because I like the genre, but I've never successfully written romance. You know, what happens is that at some point, a cop shows up, or there's a dark twist in the tale, or somebody always gets killed.
All right. My next question is about the Shakti Bhatt Award. And did winning that particular award change your outlook on writing? Did it change anything about the way you write, about the way you pursue literature?
I was somewhere between stunned and slightly embarrassed. I don't write for awards, and I don't encourage people to write for awards. There's such a... I'm going to go off on a small rant if you allow me to. But there's such an obsession in our day and age with literary success. And that's very different from not just literary worth, but just the satisfactions that come from being a writer. But I think the Shakti Bhatt Award particularly, it gave me a little more confidence. I'm more sure about other people's writing than I am of my own, and I'm also a little cat-like. Once I've written a book, then it's like, okay, it's done and it's grown up and it's a kitten and it can fend for itself. I don't look back that much. And it meant a lot to me that the Shakti Bhatt Award was judged by 3 writers who I find extraordinary, including the poet and very fiery political commentator Meena Kandasamy. So it meant a lot that somebody had said, not that you haven't failed, but that maybe your work wasn't as terrible as you thought it was. And it gave me the courage to maybe go and try something else. But, with Black River coming out this year, there have been a lot of shortlists, and sometimes you're on a shortlist and sometimes you're not. And again, the thing I try to tell people, including myself, is don't take this part of it that seriously. It's really nice. It is really something to win a little commendation and a little appreciation, but that's not what you're writing for. It isn't for me.
All right. I think that's what makes you a better person between the two of us, because most days replying to an email makes me want to cry. So if I decided to write a book, and if I finished a book, then I think people do have to, just for the sake of my sanity, give me a word that says, okay, here you go. You accomplished this.
There is one thing though, chocolates. I wouldn't necessarily write for awards, but I'm very easily bribed by editors into finishing chapters. Dark chocolate, Godiva, Belgian, anything. Just send them in and, yeah.
My next question is, Black River is the first of its genre that you have written, and it also has gotten a lot of good acclamation for being such a good book, and it was also voted as the best crime thriller by The Guardian, I think. I think that's what Gitso said at some point. So my question to you is, what was the motivation and the thinking process behind diving into a genre that is so out of something that you usually don't pursue?
I think it had a lot to do with discovering, and this was a moment of great freedom, that while I loved literary fiction, I was not myself a particularly literary writer. You know, I was genre all the way. My first two books were fantasies. But crime is a challenge. To begin with, it needs to be done really well. There's a kind of clockwork to it that I still haven't mastered. I'm probably a couple of books away from figuring all of that out. But there's a satisfaction when you get that right. It's like working on a, for Bergerac or something as beautiful and intricate. You want to get all the moving parts to come together. But the second part is crime is the smuggler genre. You can say that you're writing crime fiction, and under the guise, under that cloak, you can put a lot more into a book. And I think crime writers from Ian Rankin to Tana French to definitely the Scandinavians and the Japanese have discovered this. You can say what you want to about a society that might be corroding or collapsing, or that has fault lines, or where people, don't want to look away from the beautiful surface at what's underneath. And I think that's why it fascinates us. It's also, like fantasy, it's a really old genre. So the only scary thing about writing crime fiction is that your competition, past and present, is terrifying. There's all of us step in knowing that we're never likely to live up to the grades. But then you're writing for fun. You're not writing to win. And to win a little bit.
My next question is, so in your essay collection, The Girl Who Ate Books, you draw from your columns spanning over 2 decades. So what was the inspiration behind that particular compilation? Is it because you were the girl who ate the books?
I'm afraid my relationship with books was famously tactile. But that was in a day when, they were published on much better paper. And the paper it smelled like ice cream, and it tasted like cookies. And when I liked a story, I ate it. I don't do that anymore. At least I don't confess to it in public. But I think that was when I realized that I was going to be a book lover for life, because by the time I was about 6 years old, many of my books, and to their dismay, many of my relatives' books, had little crumpled edges where the book-eating monster had her wicked way with them. The Girl Who Ate Books, though, an editor asked me to put them together, and it's a little bit of a hodgepodge. Some of it, of course, is just interviews with Indian writers. I'm so glad that we collected them because, since we did, a lot of that material has disappeared from the internet, and you realize that it's a way to honor the people who came before you. And some of it is just unabashed essays on reading and what it means to be a reader in different ways.
My next question is, we were talking about how you were such a cat person earlier, and then my question to you is, if your cats, Magnus, Jenny, Bathsheba, and Lola, if they could read your work, if they could review your books, do you think they would have any positive feedback on your work?
I think what they would say is that there's too many big feet, aka humans, in there, and not enough cats.
And the next thing is, I would like you to do a short reading for the book, because we do.
Sonam, thank you. That was really a lot of fun for me, and I hope for everybody attending.
Thank you.
And Black River is... it's a little bit of noir fiction, and it's set, I think all you need to know at this stage is that the action's happening not very far from Delhi, but in a little village, a fictional village called Titarpur, where once you've taken that 1-hour journey, you're in a completely different place and time. So. Every summer, the heat grows more fierce. The dark trees and the forests that the villagers have protected and held sacred for centuries, shrivel in this furnace. Even the peafowl that roam the slopes are too listless to call out to each other, and the silence in the forest settles heavily around Chand and Munya, father and daughter, and Chand's bringing her up on his own. As the temperature soars, the red rot spreads across Chand's land. The blight races from field to field, no matter how diligently the farmers of Titarpur uproot the infected clumps of sugarcane. The stench, fermenting, gangrenous, rides across the fields along with the smell of burnt crops. Bugs fatten on the spoils, and white grubs scuttle out of the way of the flames, fastening onto new stands. The rock takes hold easily, the land smoulders. Smoke from the cane fires hangs thick and acrid over the village. Chand has to leave Munya behind when he sets out to tend his sugarcane fields. He ignores his daughter's pleading eyes, even though it's her birthday week, gently turns down her soft demand to be carried there on the high throne of his shoulders, to be included as an essential part of his working life. Chand tells her, "You're 8 years old, all grown up now. Don't give your aunt any trouble while I'm away. You promise?" Munya nods, reluctantly. But Munya's silent prayers work. Her aunt leaves to collect wood for the stove, and in a flash, she's out exploring. The sun leaves thorny prickles on her skinny bare legs as she steps into the cool grey mud where her father had watered the plants that morning. She likes the way it squishes up between her toes, a friendly massage from the earth. A strip of sun-baked earth, powdery and ferociously hot beneath the soles of her feet, spans the gap between the bund and the neem and jamun trees. The thin, silver tinkling of her anklets set off a faint carillon as she fits one foot, and then the next, into the white cracks in the scorching earth. She shudders at the delicious change in temperature, the coolness secreted away deep inside the furrowed land. Placing her cheek against the bark of the tree, she feels the difference between smooth bark and scaly bark, the texture of each tree as singular and well known to her as her own family's faces, her uncle's rich dark skin, her aunt's papery delicate skin, and the comforting touch of her father's rough-skinned gentle fingers. She walks warily over the fallen nimbolis, careful not to tread on the green berries hard as stones. It is quiet in the orchard, with no spring breeze to cool the air, only the first heavy stirrings of the summer heat rising up from the dust. A worker's scaffold, the shape of a swing, lies at the foot of the tree, anointed by a thick coil of rope, a leftover from the construction on the lovely pure veg bhojanalaya. She had seen her father use it to repair the roof thatch. She ducks beneath the jamuns, and their slender, long-fingered branches reach out and brush her tangled sun-browned hair. Munya has plucked a skirt full of berries when she sees the man. He is in the nearby plot, leaning back against the makeshift planks of cartwood that wrestle the thorny bushes into a low fence. Strangers rarely come through these paths. There's nothing to tempt them in this untended plot of common land that separates the fields from the forest soaring above. But this man is no stranger.
That's the end of the discussion, and we'll open the floor for if you have any questions that you may have. And yes, I think.
Hello. Okay, I think I should stand up. It's more respectful. Kuzampala, my name is Sandy. Everyone knows, quite famous. Anyways, I really related to you when you talked about writing a romance novel. And I just started out writing, and I'm just like a teeny tiny writer right now. I'm just gonna slowly write more and more. But I was thinking about writing a romance novel because everybody loves it. And even in movies, you have DDLG, and romance is just like full blown. It's amazing, and I feel like people will like it, right? And in the past, I couldn't write romance novels because I thought maybe because I don't have love in my life. And now I do have love in my life, but I still can't write it. So I was wondering, what's your reason? I still can't write it. I don't know why, but I was wondering, what's your reason why you can't write novels, like romance novels? Yeah, that's the question. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to get serious about this. Though it's very sad to get serious about romance. It should just be playful and fun and walks on the beach. I think the reason I can't write romance is because it's not just to do with the Paraku, I don't know the genre that well, but at some level, there's something about the story that doesn't work for me as a writer. You know, as a reader, yes, absolutely, I want to read it. But I've never, if I'm truthful to myself, I've never wanted to write about falling in love unless it's a cat with a cat or something of the sort. You know, so with you, you know, what's the motivation? A lot of the romance writers I know, what they love is just the idea of making it come to life, you know, no matter how many Mills and Boons or contemporary romances you've read, of, you know, just making people happy for that time and making it believable. Technically speaking, it's quite a challenge, you know, but I guess the question to answer is that would you rather fall in love or would you rather write for love?
Hi, thank you so much, Nilanjana, especially that reading you did. I really loved it because it reminded me of one of my all-time favorite books, 100 Years of Solitude. And I think the love that you have for the natural world is like, it shows through as well. I look forward to reading it. I have two questions that I'm hoping you could somehow work into your one answer. First, kind of going back to what you talked earlier about, I think oftentimes as we're getting into adulthood, like there's a lot of practical things that we're often like reminded that we have to do. What I mean by that is that I think in a lot of my favorite writers, what I see is that they've given themselves the license to be a child once again. And I think even in the reading that you just did, that kind of sensitivity towards the world around you, you almost have to kind of go back to that state of a childhood, you know, that innocence and that freshness, which is often taken away as we go into adulthood. So one, I think for any aspiring writers, how do you make that happen? Secondly, I was also wondering if you could, lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, second one is about language. Sorry, I feel like often, at least my generation, we've grown up with a mishmash of languages. And even speaking for myself, I think in my mother tongue, and there's certain concepts that you just can't get it out into English. So for someone who aspires to write in English, and I think even for you, I'm sure your mother tongue is not English, and I don't know whether you think in English or in your mother tongue, and there are certain concepts that you think or struggle with to translate into English and still retain the essence of what it is that you're trying to communicate across. So my second question is, how do you make that happen when you're forced to write in a language that's not your own?
Great questions, and right on the questions, you know, completely. I'm going to take the second one first and then come back. Black River is written in English, but most of its characters don't just speak Hindi, they speak different dialects of Hindi. So one of them, Chand, he's a farmer. His Hindi is very, you know, non-city, but comfortable with, he could pass for a city dweller. Khalid and Rabia, they've come down from Bihar. They originally Bengali speakers who had a smattering of Hindi, and the city really, really teaches them how to speak. They have no, you know, it teaches them how to speak a Delhi Hindi. And I think I was terrified with the book that I was going to get it wrong. I didn't want it to sound fake translated, you know. And I had to pull off this thing that you do when you're hybrid, and a lot of us are. We live in two languages, we keep moving between one and the other. Once you understand that there's that movement, it becomes much easier. I think in Hindi, and I write in English when I'm writing their conversations, and somehow it works. But the closer I am to their voice, the closer I am to living in their skin and seeing things through their eyes, then I know I'm not going to let them down with, you know, crooked English. But a lot of it is, we keep looking at translation, and this is something I learned from a translator friend, Arunava Sinha, who was just a genius. We keep looking at, you know, this movement from one language to another as being a question of a choice of words. But if you think about it, everyone in this room speaks differently. Everyone in this room has different registers. Somebody, you know, might start off with ums and ahs, and somebody might take long pauses between their phrases. Somebody might use a lot of colors when they speak. and somebody else, might end everything with an exclamation mark or a question. And when you pick up on that, you can put that back into any language. It's just a question of texture more than voice. The second question, I think that's huge. I think writers are not necessarily innocent people. There's a lot of rogues among that particular gallery, and a lot of people who are also, ambitious or practical or whatever it is. But somewhere, if you really want to be a writer, and whatever genre, whatever, kind of writing you choose, you have to learn to see again. You have to be able to get back either to that way of seeing things the way a child does, fresh for the first time. And if not that, at least whatever it is that you're looking at, I believe you have to find a way to see it, with completely innocent eyes, not knowing what its history is. The people who pull that off again really well are artists all the time, and designers and architects. Architects see space more than they actually see what they're building. But I think, for all of us, it's not visualizing. It's really learning to wipe the slate clean and then look, and then wipe it again and then look. I don't know whether that helps, but that's the closest I can get to describing what is, after all, a little bit of a mystery.
Hi, Nilanjana. Thank you so much. Very illuminating, lovely session. Well done, Pam. All this while, you left me somewhere halfway along, and I was lost in thought a little while, and I had to catch up. I'd really like to know, when you're done and dusted, and you finally said enough is enough, and you're done with the story and you're published, what sort of a psychological impact has changing the genre that you've attacked had on you? Has it been different from the completion of the other works in the hangovers that one may be afflicted by?
It's been incredible in every way. You're very vulnerable when you finish a book. And with me also, what I said, that thing about the cat and the kittens, part of it is true. I want to move into the next. But you also have to be a little respectful to the world that you created. It takes a little time to fade. I think I was completely taken aback by the reaction to Black River. From readers, there's been a tremendous warmth. From reviewers, again, I think I'm very grateful that so many of them saw what the book was trying to do. I don't know whether any of my books will ever succeed completely, because the vision that you have in your head is beautiful and shining, and what you translate onto the page is never completely there, It's, no matter how much you try, there's a point at which you just have to let it go, but the vision in your head is that much more shining and charming, and that's what I'm going to be heading towards. I think, what happens is a strange thing. The book that you had in your mind and the book that you were writing all this time has a particular reality. I missed my characters. I really missed them. Not so much with the Wildings and 100 Names of Darkness, because we have cats of our own and we know the cats and the stray dogs in the area. But when I finished that last chapter and I sent it to my agent, David Godwin, and David called, he's very sharp about these things. And he said, "You're mourning, aren't you?" I said, "They've gone. I've spent the better part of 3 years at least, more like 5, 7 with them. And unlike real friends, they moved so far away that I never see them again, and I miss them." And he said, that's all right, wait and see what's going to happen, because writers are ruthless, and then you find a new set of people, and that's how it continues. But I think, the worlds are bigger than us. None of us ever knows really, honestly, if we are being true to ourselves. We can't take the credit. Writing, I think any creative act comes from a place that is simultaneously shaped by you, but it's a little mysterious as well. And all we're doing is lowering our little buckets into the well. That's protective. And the second thing is that readers recreate the book. They will take your books and they will reread it in a way that you may not have expected. And whether you agree or disagree, mostly I'm just extremely grateful. you know that it's their prerogative. That's exactly what I did when I was a kid with 100 Years of Solitude. I made it my own book. It's an extraordinary thing, actually, this whole business about making up stories and then sharing them with people whom you may never get to know. I feel very privileged to be doing that for a living. Thank you.
As I'm hearing you, I keep hearing about characters a lot. And again, I think there are no such rules, but there are some people who think of plot and story first, and there are some who may think of characters first. What was it for you when it comes to this particular book or your past two books? Was it one particular character or characters, and then that character took you through the story? Or did you think of this plot and story or theme, and then you started shaping up your characters? Thank you.
I have a lot of respect for the plotters of this world. Some of my favorite writers are people who start with plot, like Stephen King sometimes does. For me, it's always solidly visual. There's an image that comes to me. With Black River, there were 3 that came to me separately, and I had no idea what the relationship between these people were. I spent years trying to figure that one out. There was a young man standing on the ITO bridge, and this is the most polluted and crowded crossing in all of Delhi. But he was looking down at the crowds, and his eyes were just alight with the sense of having arrived in this huge, huge megalopolis. And he was going to make something happen, but he'd just come there with a fistful of dreams. He was burning with it, he was shining with it. And the other 2 people I saw was Rabia. She was just refusing to leave. She was being told to leave, and she was saying, no, I won't go, this is my place, my home. I didn't know at that point of time that they were related. I went off and got busy with something else. And, for those of us, I think, who are visual writers, I think we spend a lot of our time basically, with these images mysteriously coming to us and then trying to discover who these people are, who seem to know us better than we know them. And the story and the plot comes much later. But I hope that works. A lot of writers are image-driven. And do I have time to ask Sonam a question? Yeah. Because, I was just wondering about something that she said, and we have 2 writers on stage, not one. And
Not true.
no, but this whole business of just writing for yourself rather than writing towards getting a book done or whatever. And I used to blog before I became a writer, and I remember there was a huge freedom with that. So is that, what you feel when you're writing your poems? Are you writing them to share? Or is the satisfaction just from catching something in the moment?
So one thing about the things that I write is I only write when I'm at my most mentally ill. So I only write when I'm not doing that good. So I haven't written in the longest time because I am happy. So, but yeah, I think most of the time I usually write so that I have a place to vent, and that's it. That's it.
5 years, and people have constantly asked me, when's your first book coming out? When's your first book coming out? I think they stopped asking that question about 5 years ago, and I stopped believing in it also. However, just having been invited here by friends, I came on a whim, and to be nice to them. Good to see you both, by the way. Yeah, and somehow I find that although I've attended so many talks of this sort in the past, nothing has quite made as much sense as you have right now. I just wanted to be clear about that. I must thank you, I'll thank CIE and the Bhutan Echoes as well, and Sonam, right, for those fabulous questions. Because so many of the answers, so many of the questions that I had in my head were somehow answered by you. And I think a lot of that comes from your honesty and your sincerity. The plainness and the truthfulness with which you were able to talk, I think. And a lot of that is reflected in your writing as well. I've never read you before, I must confess, and I definitely will read you now. When I listen to your little reading as well, your adjectives are not superfluous, they're not overdone, your verbs are precise, all lending itself to a breeziness that, yeah, and it comes out in your personality as well, with the honesty and sincerity with which you spoke. So many of the questions that I had in my head, whether it was about transitioning from non-fiction to fiction, to simply using your imagination, letting it flow, finding inspiration in things. My girlfriend is an artist as well. She hasn't painted anything in the last 2 months. I have so much to share with her now, finding inspiration in the world around you. So I just wanted to say thank you. So was there a question somewhere? I'm not quite sure. Oh yeah, one thing that did strike me is, okay, so when you, like in non-fiction, what we generally do is we research, we collect a lot of material, and typically you'll throw out about 90-95% of what you've collected and use the 5% that's really good. Would research have any place in fiction as well, or is it just using your imagination? Maybe that's a question that I have.
So 3 things. One, thank you. I'm really touched, that you would respond in this way. The second thing is, yes, research does. Third, I suspect that's not the question you wanted to ask.
I don't know if I had a question.
And research, definitely. I think it goes both ways. Non-fiction writers are often like fiction writers. You take liberties, the way you shape reality, the frame that you put on it, the person whose eyes you're seeing something through. Those are deep choices, as much as fiction is. You're shaping a story as well, even if it's tied to reality. And the best fiction writers I know, I mentioned Toni Morrison, you mentioned Garcia Marquez. Garcia Marquez used a lot of Macondo, was from reality, but just ever so lightly colorized, just ever so lightly lifted up and wafted into the air 3 feet up. That famous example about the sheets, Mercedes sheets. And he said, okay, people wouldn't believe me if I just told the story like that, but the moment I take the sheets off the line and send them into the sky, then everybody can see it, and they're calling it magical realism, but it has a basis of fact. But what I wanted to say, and not just to you, but I think the most liberating thing that anybody said to me when I was stuck on writing just before The Wildlings came out was, you don't have to write. It's fine. You really don't have to write if it's a chore or if it's not your thing. And at the same time, if there's something that you want to write, it doesn't matter, you'll find the container. It doesn't have to be a novel. It doesn't have to be a collection of short stories. It could just be poems. It could be a page in your journal every day. But if you enjoy that, ultimately the thing you love about writing is just this. It's so strange. All we are doing is we are taking a pen or a keyboard and we're making these abstract shapes on paper. It's not like drawing. It's not like dancing or singing where you can see and hear it. And at the same time, you look at those words and, you carry them back and forth, and everybody knows the story is right out there. You can see it, you can feel it, you can smell it. Anyway, thank you so much. I've talked too much. And I'm sorry I've gone really long on the questions, but thank you.
Before we leave, I would like to thank Bhutan Echoes and then the Right Circle and all of you for making time and coming here today. And it has been a wonderful experience. And thank you so much for sharing the stage with me. And before I leave, I just want to say one thing that I always wanted to say. Maybe the real literature was the friends we made along the way. Just kidding. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you Nilanjana, thank you Sonam. That was a fantastic conversation. I think all of us enjoyed this so much. Before I let all of you go today, I have to thank all of you, the entire literary community of Bhutan. From all of us at CIE, we're absolutely delighted, super fortunate and very, very proud to be back here for this event, and hopefully we'll keep coming back every few months with more such sessions. Thank you also to the Prabha Khaitan Foundation, to Sri Cement, and to the amazing, amazing Bhutan Echoes team for pulling it off here. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone. We've got copies of Nilanjana's latest book, Black River, for all of you. 1 book per family. They're outside. Nilanjana is going to be here to sign them for you. Yeah, that's it for me. Thank you. We'll see you next time.
पहाड़ों से गलियों किनारों से तेरी पहले की पहचान है। बादलों विचारों से खुशी की फुहारों से काहे जाने तू